Emily's hands weren't steady. The coffee mug clattered lightly against the saucer as she set it down, the hot liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The comforting, familiar scent of Margie's. A heavy blend of brewing coffee, melting butter, and the sharp sizzle of bacon fat on the griddle was usually a dependable shield against the world. Today it felt suffocating. The mechanical chaos of the morning rush. Orders shouted, dishes clattering. The low, steady drone of neighborhood conversation was meant to be soothing, a familiar routine. But a premonition, a sickening wave of dread, caused her skin to prickle with cold certainty. Her gaze drifted involuntarily to the wide, dusty front window. That's where she saw him, Brett. The sight was a punch to the gut, a cold, sickening lurch that stole her breath. He was cutting across the asphalt parking lot, headed straight for the diner's entrance. He was forbidden from this place, warned off by the manager after the last incident, after the final, terrible conversation where she had ended it. And certainly not after the formal warning Charlie had issued. The cheap brass bell above the door didn't just jingle. It shrieked frantically as Brett slammed the door inward with needless, aggressive force. The conversation in the diner died instantly. A few regulars paused mid-chew, looking up from their plates. Emily forced a shallow breath into her lungs. Maybe he'd just sit down like a normal customer. Maybe he wouldn't make a scene. Emily, he bellowed, recognizing her behind the counter. His voice, thick and grating, carried a note of early morning belligerence, already slurring. It was barely 9 o'clock, yet the unmistakable, sickly sweet smell of stale whiskey and unwashed clothing preceded him. He swaggered toward the counter, his shoulders aggressively hunched. The rush of mortification was scalding. Emily felt the blood flood her neck and cheeks as all heads snapped toward the sudden disturbance. She forced a tight, brittle smile onto her lips. "Brett, you shouldn't be here," she said quietly, leaning forward over the counter to try and keep their exchange contained. "I'm working, please." He ignored her hushed, desperate tone, leaning in close instead. "Came to see my girl. That a crime?" He drawled, ensuring his voice carried over the lingering silence. "I'm not your girl," Emily replied, her voice low but instilled with a trembling firmness. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs. She could feel the heavy weight of curious, judgmental stares from nearby tables. This was the exact, devastating situation she had spent weeks dreading. Her private nightmare spilling into the sterile, public sanctuary of her workplace. Brett's expression curdled instantly, the mask of false charm melting away. "Don't start with that," he growled. His hand darted out, a shocking, unexpected grab, closing around her forearm across the counter. Emily sucked in a sharp, agonizing breath as the sudden, bone-deep pressure jolted pain straight up to her shoulder. "You've been dodging my calls. Think you can just cut me off? Make me look like a damn fool?" Out of the corner of her eye, Emily saw Charlie, the diner's graying 60-year-old manager, straighten up from the register. He looked profoundly worried, one hand already reaching for the phone mounted on the wall. A couple of regulars shifted uneasily in their seats, sensing the impending explosion. The air felt dangerously charged, everyone bracing for the inevitable release of Brett's notorious temper. "Brett, let go of me," Emily whispered urgently. She tugged hard, but his grip only tightened, becoming an iron vice. The worn formica edge of the counter bit into her hips as he yanked her weight halfway over. Plates rattled precariously, and a half-filled, thick ceramic mug of coffee crashed to the tile floor, exploding into shards and steaming brown liquid. A small child in a nearby booth let out a frightened gasp. "Hurting you," Brett sneered, his eyes blazing with dark amusement as he twisted her arm just enough to elicit a faint, strangled cry of pain. "You don't know what hurt is, Em. Not yet." The implied threat hung in the air, sharp and destructive as the broken glass at her feet. Emily's pulse skyrocketed. She saw truly now the wild, unhinged look in his eyes. He was beyond reasoning. Charlie hurried forward, hands raised in a placating, non-threatening manner. "Sir, you need to let her go. he said, his voice calm but undeniably edged with command. This isn't the place for this. Back off. Brett snarled without even sparing the older man a glance. In a flash, he released Emily's arm only to round on Charlie, shoving him hard in the chest. The manager stumbled back several feet, colliding with a small table. Utensils and napkin dispensers clattered noisily to the floor. Murmurs of alarm rippled through the diner. Stumbling free, Emily immediately put herself between Brett and Charlie before the situation could escalate further. Her arm throbbed where his fingers had dug in, but adrenaline was a potent, temporary anesthetic. Brett, stop it, she pleaded, her voice shaking despite her desperate resolve to maintain control. You're causing a scene. Brett's attention swung back to her. His face twisted now with a mix of injured humiliation and raw, ugly rage. You think I care about a scene? He spat. Maybe I should show all these people what a tease you are. Playing the sweet little waitress, acting like you're too good for me now. Hey, hey! The sound was a precise cut through the escalating violence. A low, controlled baritone that somehow commanded absolute silence. That's enough. Emily's breath hitched. She recognized that voice, the quiet man in the secluded corner booth. Luca, a regular who came in a few times a week, always polite, always inconspicuous. Amid the chaos, she hadn't even registered his presence this morning. Luca Romano rose slowly from his seat, deliberately folding the financial section of his newspaper with calm, lethal precision before setting it aside. He adjusted the cuff of his perfectly tailored, immaculate charcoal suit, a gesture of almost unnerving composure, and began walking toward the counter. The diner fell into an even deeper, oppressive hush. There was a potent, quiet authority in Luca's measured stride and in the dark, intense fixedness of his gaze on Brett. Brett bristled, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, especially not by this sleek stranger. Who the hell are you? He snapped, his eyes narrowing. This ain't your business. Walk away. Luca came to a stop a few paces from them. He was maybe in his mid-30s, tall and utterly composed, with neatly combed jet-black hair. When he finally spoke, his tone remained almost gentle, but the underlying steel was palpable. The lady asked you to leave. You should do as she says. A few customers murmured agreement. Emboldened by Luca's quiet intervention, old Jim, the retired army vet who practically lived at the diner, stood up as well, glaring fiercely at Brett. Emily's heart fluttered nervously. The last thing she wanted was a brawl. Yet seeing others finally stand up for her flooded her with a complex mix of relief and fear. Brett's eyes flicked around the room and realized, with a jolt, that he was utterly outnumbered in sentiment, if not yet in sheer muscle. He let out a derisive laugh, but it sounded strained and shaky. This isn't over, he hissed, pointing a finger inches from her face. You and me, we're gonna talk later. With a final, hateful glare directed at Luca, who hadn't moved but somehow still exuded quiet menace, Brett backed away. The brass bell jangled sharply as he slammed out of the diner. The silence held for a strained beat. Emily stood there, her chest heaving with pent-up terror, staring at the still swinging door. He was gone for now. Slowly, the chatter of concerned patrons tentatively resumed. Luca stepped closer to her. Are you all right? He asked quietly, his dark eyes sweeping over her in a quick, professional assessment, lingering for a moment on the red marks already blooming on her forearm. Emily swallowed hard, nodding numbly. Thank you, she managed to whisper. The shame was overwhelming now that Brett was no longer monopolizing her vision. She could feel everyone's gaze still fixed on her. The poor, unlucky waitress with the volatile tears of humiliation pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. I'm sorry you had to. You have nothing to apologize for? Luca interrupted gently. He reached out, then paused, clearly not wanting to overstep the mark of intimacy. Eventually, he settled on simply straightening the apron that had been pulled askew in the scuffle. It was such a simple, almost private gesture that Emily found herself momentarily speechless. Charlie approached, rubbing his shoulder with a wince of pain. "Emily, you okay, kid?" "I'm fine," she lied softly. Her arm throbbed and her nerves were utterly fried, but physically, she would survive. "Charlie, I'm so sorry." He held up a hand. "None of that. Why don't you take 10? Go splash some cold water on your face." Emily hesitated. The breakfast rush still needed tending, and she hated the thought of abandoning her coworkers in the weeds. But Charlie's firm, fatherly expression brooked no argument. "All right," she whispered as she started toward the back hallway. Luca spoke up just loudly enough for her to hear over the low noise of the returning diner. "If you need anything, I'll be around." She glanced back and found him watching her steadily. There was genuine concern in his dark eyes, and a flash of residual, protective anger on her behalf. A weak smile tugged at her lips. She nodded in thanks and hurried to the restroom. Behind the locked door, Emily gripped the cold porcelain sink and let out a long, shuddering breath. The girl in the mirror looked small and profoundly shaken, her auburn hair coming loose from its ponytail. Her green eyes were shiny with unshed tears. Bruises were already surfacing beneath her fair skin where Brett had grabbed her. Shame and fury warred inside her chest. She had hoped, had prayed, that Brett would just leave her alone after their last fight weeks ago. Instead, he'd violated the one sanctuary she had left, her workplace, her last slice of normal life. She ran cold water and dabbed it carefully on her throbbing face. Gradually, her racing heart began to slow. The powerful adrenaline ebbed, replaced by a dull, persistent ache of worry. What would Brett do now? He was publicly embarrassed and dangerously angry, never a safe combination. The flimsy restraining order she'd filed clearly meant nothing to him. And the police? Well, by the time they arrived, if someone had even called them, Brett would be long gone. A light, clearing throat knock at the restroom door made her jump violently. "Emily, it's me," came Charlie's voice. She opened the door, forcing a smile for her boss's sake. "I'm all right, Charlie. Really." He frowned kindly, looking past her flimsy facade. "You don't have to be. I've seen a lot in my years, kid. I know what a scared woman looks like. You don't deserve this." The sympathy nearly undid her. Emily bit her lip hard. "I'll be fine," she insisted. "I can finish the shift." Charlie studied her, then sighed heavily. "All right, but if you feel faint or anything, you go rest." "Understood?" She nodded. The truth was, she desperately needed the hours. Rent was due next week, and her mom's medical bills weren't getting any smaller. A missed shift was a luxury she couldn't afford. They returned to the dining area together. To her relief, things had mostly calmed down. A few customers gave her supportive nods as she passed, and one kind older woman patted Emily's hand and whispered, "You stay safe, honey," when paying her bill. Luca had settled back into his corner booth, his newspaper open again as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. Yet Emily noticed he hadn't touched his coffee. It sat, probably cold now, his attention subtly on her instead. Each time the front door swung open with a new patron, Luca's dark gaze flickered sharply to it, ensuring it wasn't Brett returning for round 2. She was warmed, yet utterly unsettled, by the realization that this near stranger cared enough to keep vigil. She knew him only as Luca, or sometimes, in the hushed, respectful tones of the other staff, Mr. Romano. He was an enigma, tall, always flawless, seemingly a high-level businessman, maybe with an office downtown. He always paid in crisp, new hundreds, and possessed an aura of quiet, understated authority that made even hardened regulars like old Jim give him a wide, respectful berth. An hour passed. The breakfast rush petered out. Emily's arm hurt where Brett had yanked it, but it was a manageable throb. She had just refilled Luca's fresh cup of coffee, on the house this time, when her cell phone buzzed softly in the pocket of her apron. She frowned. It was a text from her mother. *Mom. Can you come home? Sweetie? I need you. Emily's brow furrowed with concern. Her mom never texted during her work shift unless it was urgent. Immediately, her mind conjured the worst-case scenarios. A medical episode, a fall, Something broken besides Emily's pride today. I'll be there soon, Mom, she quickly thumbed back. She untied her apron and approached Charlie, phone in hand. Charlie, I'm sorry, but my mom. He waved her off kindly. Go. Family first. Hope everything's okay. Thank you, Emily breathed. She gathered her purse, wincing as she slung the strap over her sore arm, and headed for the door. Her eyes involuntarily flicked to Luca's booth. He was already watching her, concern etched onto his handsome features. Everything all right? He asked quietly as she passed. She mustered a tight, weak smile. Just a family thing. I have to leave a little early. Luca's jaw tightened a fraction, but he inclined his head. Be safe. And Emily, if you need help, any help at all, you have my number. She realized that in the chaos, he had slipped his business card onto the counter earlier. It was now tucked safely in her apron pocket. Nodding, she whispered, Thank you. It wasn't nearly adequate to cover what he'd done. But Luca seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. He gave her one last searching look, then let her go. Outside, the day had turned heavy and gray, a humid storm brewing by the feel of it. Emily hurried the 5 blocks to the small apartment she shared with her mother, anxiety mounting with each step. Her mom's health had been fragile lately, complicated by a heart condition and years of stress. Emily had picked up an extra waitressing job on weekends and even trained part-time as a certified nursing assistant just to manage the relentless medical costs. The thought of something happening to her mother because she wasn't there in time clawed at her conscience. The anxiety of her mother's call had monopolized her senses. She didn't register the shadow lurking beside the crumbling concrete stairwell until a rough, alcohol-soaked hand clamped brutally over her mouth from behind. Panic detonated. Brett. She knew instantly. He hadn't gone far. She bucked and struggled, kicking backward, but his weight was overwhelming. He dragged her violently into the narrow, stinking alleyway parallel to the building, slamming her body against the cold, jagged brick wall. Her purse and phone scattered onto the filthy ground. Emily's vision blurred with pain and sheer terror. You think you can make a fool of me? Brett snarled, his forearm pressing excruciatingly across her collarbone. His eyes were manic, sweat beading on his furious brow. Got your new boyfriend protecting you at work. Huh? That it? You spread your legs for some rich guy, and suddenly you're too good for me? The accusation, fueled by sick jealousy, ignited a hot flash of pure rage that momentarily overcame her terror. Shut up. That's not. He cut her off with a vicious backhand, a sickening, sharp crack that split her lip instantly. Don't you tell me to shut up, he roared. You're mine, Emily. No one walks away from me. Dazed, tasting the metallic warmth of her own blood, Emily knew rational thought was useless. Not this time. She had to break free. She opened her mouth and let out a raw, desperate scream for help. He instantly shifted his weight, closing a hand like a vice around her throat and squeezing. Her scream became a choked, rattling wheeze. Spots danced in her failing vision. Desperately, she scratched at his arm, kicked futilely at his shins. He barely flinched. You really think some paper restraining order will stop me? Think that fancy suit bastard at the diner scares me? Brett leaned in, his eyes glinting with something akin to pleasure at her helplessness. No, baby. If I can't have you, no one will. In a surge of pure, primal adrenaline, Emily's groping left hand closed around a half-buried glass bottle near the alley wall. She swung it wildly, blindly. The bottle shattered against the side of Brett's head with a dull crunch. He yelled in pain and staggered back, releasing her. Emily sucked in air, gasping. Don't hesitate. She told herself. Run. She bolted toward the open end of the alley, but Brett was quicker than a drunk ought to be. He grabbed a handful of her auburn hair, yanking her backwards. Emily screamed as she fell hard to the grimy ground. Brett loomed over her, fury and a trickle of blood down his temple making him look almost demonic. You stupid bitch, he snarled. He lashed out with his boot, kicking her brutally in the side as she tried to scramble away on hands and knees. Pain exploded in her ribs. Emily sobbed, collapsing onto her back. Brett's face twisted with a terrifying, calm realization. She had dared to fight back, to embarrass him again. A terrifying quiet settled over his features. He dropped to one knee beside her. "You want hurt?" He panted, his breath reeking of booze and malevolence. "Fine. How's this?" Before she could even register the motion, his hands shot out and seized her right arm. He twisted and wrenched it with every ounce of his savage strength. Crack. A white-hot, blinding bolt of agony obliterated all other sensation. Emily's scream was ripped from her lungs, a raw, primal sound that barely seemed human. She felt the sickening snap, the grinding give of bone. Agony blazed from her shoulder down to her numb fingertips. Brett let go. Emily instinctively cradled her useless arm to her chest, curling around it on the filthy ground. It hung at an unnatural, frightening angle, already swelling rapidly. "Oh God! Oh God!" she moaned weakly. Shock made everything hazy. This couldn't be real. It was a nightmare. She dimly became aware of Brett breathing heavily above her. He stared down at what he'd done, perhaps momentarily surprised at the depth of his own brutality. Then, sirens wailed in the distance. Someone must have heard her scream or the commotion. Brett cursed, scrambling backward. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice high and panicked. Emily lay on the ground, tears streaming, her vision blackening at the edges from the sheer, overwhelming pain. She watched through swimming eyes as he staggered off down the alley and disappeared, his parting promise echoing cruelly. Not by a long shot. Rain began to patter, cool droplets on her fevered skin. Emily closed her eyes, clutching her broken arm. Every heartbeat sent a new wave of white-hot agony through her. "I need help." The thought cut through the shock. Her phone. Where was her phone? She forced herself to roll to her left side, biting back a scream as her injured arm jostled. There, her purse contents spilled out, and amid them her cheap flip phone. The screen was cracked but faintly glowing. Emily crawled over, cradling her useless right arm against her belly. With the trembling fingers of her left hand, she flipped it open. Who to call? But Brett might come back if he saw her on the phone, or if he heard sirens and blamed her. Another spike of fear. In the blinding haze of pain, one name materialized. Luca. She had his card. She didn't even know if he could help, but he told her to call if she ever needed anything. And right now, she needed someone. Anyone. And she needed them fast. Her vision blurred with tears as she scrolled to the number he'd scribbled on the back of his card and hit call. It rang only once before a deep voice answered, instantly sharp with alarm. "Emily?" A sob of pure, desperate relief and agonizing pain escaped her. "He broke my arm," she managed to gasp out, the words tumbling out first. "Brett, he broke my arm. She was shaking too violently to continue. There was the briefest, deadliest silence on the line. Then Luca's voice came, low and tightly controlled. "Where are you?" "My apartment." "Allie," she gasped. Dark spots swam in her vision. She fought desperately to stay conscious. "He's gone now. I think." "I'm on my way," Luca interrupted, an intense urgency underlying his calm tone. 10 minutes. Stay with me, Emily. Keep talking." Hearing that steady voice helped tether her to reality. She gulped shallow breaths, curling against the alley wall as thunder rumbled overhead. In halting whimpers, she told him everything. How Brett had been lying in wait, how he had hurt her. Luca listened, murmuring encouragement and quiet fury in equal measure. "Don't move any more than you have to," he instructed. "Help is coming. I'm coming." Blue and red lights flickered at the alley's mouth, resolving into a police cruiser. 2 officers cautiously approached, having followed the earlier 911 call for a disturbance. Emily stiffened. What if they took too long asking questions and she lost Luca's call? But Luca had heard the sirens, too. "The police are there?" he asked tersely. Yes, she whispered. Good. Let them help you first. I'll be there soon. Something in his tone made it clear that soon was not a gentle promise, but an order to the universe. The officers found her curled and shivering, the phone clutched in her hand. One gently knelt. Ma'am, we're getting an ambulance. Just hang tight. The other radioed in an assault and a suspect description, though Emily only croaked out Brett's name and a vague description before the pain overwhelmed her again. She vaguely remembered being loaded into an ambulance. She wouldn't let go of her phone. The paramedic had to pry it gently from her hand to get her vitals. At some point, Luca must have been told which hospital they were taking her to, because when the ambulance doors opened at the emergency room bay, he was there. Luca appeared out of the storm, his immaculate suit now soaked from the rain, his dark eyes blazing with quiet wrath. Emily was on a stretcher, disoriented from pain medication. But when she saw him, fresh tears fell. Somehow, seeing that familiar, calm, protective face made all the events of the day finally crash down on her. She was safe now, safe enough to cry, the pent-up terror finally breaking. I'm here, Luca murmured, his voice a low, steady anchor in the sterile chaos of the emergency room. He moved immediately to her side, gently taking her uninjured hand. His own hands trembled ever so slightly, a barely perceptible shudder, and in that moment, she realized the truth. He had been afraid too, afraid for her. The hours in the hospital blurred together, marked by the impersonal efficiency of triage nurses and the dull fluorescent lights. X-rays confirmed the cruel damage. A midshaft fracture of her right ulna and a hairline fracture of the radius. Both forearm bones brutally broken by Brett's malice. They stabilized her arm in a splint, then encased it in a heavy fiberglass cast. Through every painful manipulation and clinical assessment, Luca remained within arm's reach, his presence a constant, unshakable shield. He must have called her mother at some point, perhaps using the brief moment Emily was in the X-ray suite, because Marie arrived in a taxi, disheveled, frantic, and openly weeping. As soon as the staff allowed it, Marie rushed to the bedside, throwing her arms around Emily. "My baby!" she cried, stroking Emily's messy, blood-tacky hair. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I'm so desperately sorry." Emily hushed her, though her own voice caught, wavering with exhaustion. "It's not your fault, Mom. It's not." Her mother's guilt was a palpable thing, heavy in the air. Marie had only texted Emily to come home, unwittingly setting the stage for danger. At this, Luca gently but firmly interjected. "Marie, you did nothing wrong. The blame lies solely with the man who did this." His tone suddenly turned grim, the sound of polished steel grinding. "And he will answer for it." There was such cold, absolute certainty in his voice, a promise rather than a hope, that even Marie blinked, momentarily startled out of her grief. Emily could only squeeze Luca's hand in silent, profound gratitude. By evening, the ER discharged Emily, sending her out into the chilly night armed with a heavy fiberglass cast spanning from her wrist to above her elbow, a bulky sling, and a prescription bottle full of industrial-strength painkillers. Luca had quietly taken charge of every document and prescription, efficiently arranging follow-up appointments with an orthopedic specialist, as if managing late-night medical crises for injured women was simply part of his weekly routine. It made Emily wonder exactly what kind of life he led that such a violent medical emergency didn't even manage to ruffle the smooth surface of his composure. He insisted on driving them home, but not in a typical car. A sleek black car, an imposing luxury sedan, likely armored, pulled up to the curb, driven by a stone-faced chauffeur who had materialized out of the shadows. Marie, utterly spent, agreed without a single protest. Emily sank into the plush back seat, cocooned between her mother and Luca. She finally allowed the last vestiges of her mental defenses to collapse. It wasn't just the physical shock. It was the sheer mental exhaustion after holding herself together for so long. Luca's arm came around her shoulders, steady and protective. "Close your eyes," he murmured, his breath warm against her hair. "Try to rest." Emily nodded, tears stinging her eyes at the sheer, unexpected gentleness of this powerful man. As the city lights streamed past the tinted windows, she felt his fingers lightly brush through her disheveled hair. A purely comforting, non-intrusive gesture. She didn't know why this virtual stranger cared so profoundly, but in that moment, wrapped in his protective sphere, she was endlessly grateful he did. Half asleep against his shoulder, she became aware of Luca speaking in a low voice on the phone, perhaps to the chauffeur through a hidden headset, or to someone far away. She caught chilling, fragmented snippets. Find him. No, alive. I don't care what it takes. And later, softer, more logistical. Safe house ready. Press charges quietly handled. The words swirled menacingly in her painkiller-drugged mind. She wanted to ask what he meant, to demand answers, but sleep tugged hard, pulling her down into a deep, necessary darkness. She drifted, secure and heavy in the circle of his arm. For the first time in as long as she could recall, Emily felt truly unqualifiedly safe. Luca had her. He wouldn't let anything happen to her or her mother. When she next opened her eyes, soft lamplight was glowing on unfamiliar, cream-colored walls, illuminating tasteful, minimalist art. The bed beneath her was king-sized and plush, and she was tucked under a thick duvet. Panic flared for a split second, a sharp, cold jab of disorientation, until her eyes located the armchair near the door. Luca was slumped there, dozing, his head resting awkwardly on the high back. She remembered then, he had brought them to his home. He'd claimed it was necessary for security. His place had a doorman, layers of physical security, and a private detail, whereas their apartment had only a flimsy deadbolt. Too tired and in too much pain to argue, Emily and her mother had accepted his intimidating hospitality for the night. Judging by the inky darkness beyond the enormous window, she must have fallen asleep the moment her head hit the pillow. It was the middle of the night now. Her arm throbbed dully inside its rigid cast, a persistent, heavy ache. She carefully shifted, propping the weight of the cast on a pillow. The slight rustle of the duvet instantly woke Luca. He was awake and moving before she could draw a full breath, silently materializing at her side. "Emily, do you need something?" he asked softly, genuine concern casting a deep shadow over his handsome, weary face. She managed a small, weak smile. His tie and jacket were gone, the top buttons of his crisp dress shirt undone, revealing the line of his throat. In the dim light, he looked surprisingly young, vulnerable almost, a strand of dark hair falling over his forehead. "Water, maybe?" she whispered. He moved to the bedside table, helped her sit up slightly, and brought the glass to her lips. After she drank deeply, he brushed a crumb of sleep from her cheek with surprising tenderness, his expression unreadable. "Better?" Emily nodded. Her mother was asleep in another guest room down the hall, secure and sound. "Luca, I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice husky with emotion. "You saved my life today. Twice, actually." A muscle in his jaw tightened, flexing beneath his skin. "I'm just sorry I didn't stop him sooner," he said, a touch of self-anger coloring his tone. It sounded like failure, a debt he felt he owed. "This never should have happened to you." She reached out with her left hand, the functional one, and touched his forearm. A spontaneous, soothing touch. "It's not your fault. You did more than anyone. I'll never forget it." His intense dark eyes met hers, and for a long moment, something unsaid, potent and electric, crackled in the air between them. He cleared his throat, suddenly looking almost uncomfortable with the praise, pulling back the moment of intimacy. To change the subject, he reverted to practicality. "How's the pain?" he asked. "Manageable," she lied automatically. The meds were definitely wearing off, and a deep, grinding ache had settled into the broken bones. But she didn't want to be a bother. Luca saw right through the lie, his brow furrowing instantly. "Stay here." His voice was decisive. "I'll get your medicine." He returned a minute later with the prescribed pill and a tall glass of milk from the kitchen. A simple, comforting gesture that warmed her. Emily obeyed, swallowing the painkiller with a grateful shudder. An awkward silence followed as he stood by the bed, appearing utterly reluctant to leave her alone in the dark. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" The request slipped out before she could second-guess the vulnerability of the ask. His eyes softened, melting the harsh lines of his exhaustion. Of course. Without hesitation, he took a seat on the edge of the king-sized bed. He kept a respectful distance, his posture straight, but his physical presence alone was immensely comforting, anchoring her. Emily sank back against the pillows. In the ensuing quiet, she studied Luca's face in the low light. The strong jawline, the classic Roman nose, those intense dark eyes that had terrified Brett, yet somehow consistently eased her deepest fears. "Who are you really?" she found herself asking in a drowsy whisper, the medication beginning to pull her under. "Everyone seems to listen to you. Even the police just let you take me home." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, fleeting and enigmatic. "I have some influence in this city," he said carefully. "My family's been here a long time. Sometimes we help the police with certain issues, and they return the courtesy." It was an elegantly evasive answer, skirting the truth of his power, but Emily was too exhausted and medicated to pry. Some rational part of her already suspected Luca was no ordinary businessman. Ordinary men didn't have personal drivers who appeared out of nowhere and private security details stationed at their building. Nor did their gazes promise the swift, violent retribution she had seen in his eyes when he found her broken on the ground. Yet, she felt no fear of him. Quite the opposite. "Influence is good," she murmured. Her eyes drifted shut. "Maybe you can influence the pain in my arm to go away faster." Luca chuckled quietly, a low, rich sound. "Rest is the best medicine, I hear." He began to hum then, a deep, soothing melody that rumbled lightly through his chest. It might have been an old Italian lullaby. Emily didn't recognize the tune, but the gentle baritone eased the last of her emotional tension. Rain began to patter softly against the window glass, and Luca's murmur blended with the distant rumble of thunder in a profound lullaby of safety. In Luca's calming presence that night, Emily realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying her burdens alone. This formidable man, dangerous and commanding to the rest of the world, was utterly gentle with her, stepping into her darkness like a powerful beacon. As sleep finally pulled her under, she breathed him in. A scent of fine cologne, leather, and rain. Feeling secure and strangely hopeful about what tomorrow might bring, despite the recent violence. But early the next morning, that hope was shattered by a retaliatory strike. Brett and his newfound friends firebombed Margie's diner, hurling a Molotov cocktail through the front window just before dawn. Thankfully, the diner was empty at that hour, but the beloved eatery, Emily's place of sanctuary and employment, went up in flames. Emily and her mother awoke to the phone ringing and the terrible news that the place she loved was now a charred, smoldering shell. Emily was devastated. She sat numbly at Luca's gleaming kitchen table in his penthouse, her cast cradled to her chest, watching through tears as a morning news report showed firefighters dousing the blackened structure of the diner. All she could think was, "Charlie, my coworkers, how will they recover?" Luca placed a steady, heavy hand on her shoulder. "It can be repaired," he assured her gently. "I'll make sure of it." Before Emily could even fully process that promise, worse news arrived. A panicked call came through to Luca's personal line from one of his security men stationed outside her mother's apartment, which Marie had needed to check quickly. Despite the precautions, Brett had struck again. Using the widespread distraction of the diner fire, he'd managed to slip past the lone guard and abducted Marie when she stepped out briefly to check their mail. Emily's blood ran ice cold as Luca relayed the grim message. Her mother was gone. A few minutes later, Emily's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Her heart lodged in her throat. She opened it to see a photo that made her gasp and then scream. A picture of her mom tied tightly to a wooden chair, her eyes red and terrified. Brett's message followed immediately below the image. "Come alone or she dies." "No, no," Emily gasped, leaping up from the table. The sudden movement sent a vicious lance of pain through her broken arm, but she didn't care. Her mother's anguished, terrified face in that photo was all she could see. Brett has her. Because of me, Emily thought in horrifying clarity. He was doing this to draw her out, to finish what he started. Her breathing hitched into ragged sobs. With her good hand, she fumbled blindly for her coat near the door. He wants me. I have to go. I'll give him what he wants, she babbled, panic rising uncontrollably as she headed for the penthouse entrance. If sacrificing herself meant her mom would be freed, then so be it. Absolutely not. Luca intercepted her halfway, moving with blinding speed. His hands came to grip her shoulders firmly, forcing her to halt. That's exactly what he wants. You alone, vulnerable and injured. I am not going to let you walk into a trap. Emily trembled violently in his grasp. But if I don't go, he'll hurt her. It's my mom, Luca. I can't just. We will get her back, Luca vowed, locking his fierce eyes with hers. There was such ferocity in his gaze, such unyielding certainty, that it finally managed to halt her spiraling, panicked thoughts. He drew a steadying breath, lowering his voice slightly. Listen to me. Years ago, I lost someone I cared for to a man like Brett. I was too late to save her. A deep shadow of old, agonizing pain crossed his face before it hardened with cold resolve. I swore I'd never let that happen again. I won't lose your mother or you. But we do this my way. Together with a plan and backup. He gave her shoulders a gentle shake. Trust me, Emily. Her vision blurred with tears of fear and relief. He was asking for absolute trust when her world was completely falling apart. But Luca had earned it a dozen times over the previous hours. She clenched her eyes shut, took a ragged breath, then opened them and nodded shakily. Together, she whispered, the single word a surrender and a promise. Luca's extensive contacts quickly traced Brett and the Mel crew, the small-time, disposable gang Brett had aligned with, to an abandoned waterfront warehouse complex on the east side docks. Brett clearly thought he'd found protection with these low-level thugs. Protection from Luca's inevitable wrath. He couldn't have been more wrong. Without hesitation, Luca assembled a specialized team of his men. They moved like trained military operators, silent and lethal, and prepared to move. Emily insisted on coming. She refused to cower on the sidelines while her mother was in danger, staring at the ceiling. Luca acquiesced only after she promised to stay back unless absolutely needed, and after he outfitted her with a spare, custom-fitted bulletproof vest that hung awkwardly over her sling, but which seemed to make him feel slightly less anxious. Thunderstorms rolled in across the city, just as Luca's convoy of black SUVs approached the massive, rusted warehouse near dusk. As they positioned quietly around the loading bay, a sudden, sharp crack of gunfire rang out. One of Luca's men, moving toward a side door, stumbled back, a dark blossom of blood rapidly staining his shoulder. An enemy lookout had spotted them. Before Luca could react, Emily was already out of the SUV, moving on instinct and rushing straight toward the injured man. "Stay down!" she hissed, her broken arm screaming in protest from the sudden exertion as she knelt beside him in the gravel. With her free hand, she pressed hard onto the bleeding wound, trying to staunch the flow. The man groaned, his eyes wide with pain and surprise that this slightly built young woman was the one administering aid. Gunfire erupted around them, bullets pinging loudly off metal shipping containers and echoing against the concrete. Luca cursed furiously and returned fire from behind a concrete pillar, torn between focusing on suppressing the enemy and watching Emily crouched completely in the open. "Emily, get back!" he shouted, raw fear sharpening his voice into a command. "I've got him!" she shouted back, her voice tight but unwavering. A bullet zinged off the asphalt 2 yards away, sending up a spray of dust and grit, but she didn't flinch. Her training, both as a CNA and the crash first aid course she'd taken, kicked in fully, overriding the pain and terror. She tore a strip from the hem of her shirt using her teeth and her good hand, then expertly tied it tightly above the bleeding wound, converting the fabric into a rudimentary tourniquet. "Go, Luca. I'll keep him alive. Go." Luca hesitated, his heart pounding against his ribs, but in the glow of a nearby security light, He saw her face set in fierce determination despite the danger. She was tending to one of his men like it was the only thing that mattered in the universe. Pride and paralyzing fear warred violently in his chest. At last, he gave a sharp jerk of his head in a nod and signaled his team. They surged forward in a perfectly coordinated rush. Two of Luca's guards immediately laid down suppressing fire at the warehouse windows while Luca himself slammed a heavy combat boot into the side door, splintering the lockjam. A flash grenade was tossed inside. A deafening, concussive boom erupted, followed by bright, blinding light. By the time Emily had finished securing the improvised bandage on the wounded guard's shoulder and dragged him behind a stack of oil barrels for cover, the firefight was all but over. Inside the warehouse it was utter chaos. Half blind and disoriented from the stun grenade, Brett's new allies offered only token resistance before being ruthlessly overwhelmed. In the dim, flickering light, Luca moved like a force of nature, efficient and devastating, disarming one terrified thug with a swift, snapping strike, and pistol-whipping another who lunged foolishly at him with a knife. The remaining gang members, realizing too late exactly who they were up against, whispering the dreaded name Romano in terror, dropped their rusty weapons and scrambled to their knees, surrendering immediately. Emily crept up to the doorway, peering in cautiously while supporting the limping guard she'd helped. The vast, cavernous space smelled heavily of oil, sweat, and desperation. Wooden crates were stacked in towering columns, and near the center, an overturned chair and frayed ropes indicated exactly where her mother had been held. Marie cowered a few yards away, momentarily pushed against a metal post by one of the Mel thugs as a human shield, until Luca's men had quickly incapacitated that thug, freeing her. "Mom!" Emily cried, spotting her pale face. Marie, though her wrists were chafed raw and her face was streaked with tears, was alive and visibly unharmed. At the sound of Emily's voice, she broke away from the post and ran straight into her daughter's waiting good arm. They clung to each other tightly. "Oh, thank God, Emily," Marie sobbed hysterically. "I was so scared. He told me he'd." "It's okay," Emily soothed, tears of profound relief streaming down her cheeks. "I'm here. You're safe now. I've got you." Around them, Luca's highly efficient men rounded up the subdued gang members, kicking their weapons far out of reach and binding their wrists with brutal military-grade zip ties. A couple of the Mel thugs nursed minor injuries, one with a bullet graze, another knocked unconscious in the quick melee. The air rang with the cold, hard aftermath of violence. And at the center of it all stood Luca and Brett. Brett was on his knees in the dust, blood trickling from a split lip and a swelling cut above his brow. Gone was the cocky bravado, the delusional air of power he'd worn. His eyes showed wide whites around the edges, panicked now that he finally comprehended the terrifying storm he had brought upon himself. Luca loomed over him, his heavy pistol held steady in his hand. The muzzle was mere inches from Brett's forehead. Emily gently released her mother and stepped forward on unsteady legs. She had imagined confronting Brett again so many times, usually with paralyzing fear, sometimes with burning fury. But now, seeing him kneeling in the filthy warehouse, a pathetic, whimpering heap of bluster and cowardice, she felt nothing. No, not quite nothing. She felt finished, done with him owning a single inch of her soul or affecting her future. Brett's gaze flickered to her. Even now, a desperate, spiteful smirk tried to form on his swollen lips. "Look at you," he rasped, coughing blood. "Played hero and got your arm broke. Stupid girl. You think this fixes anything? I'll kill you for what you—" "Shut up, Brett." Emily's voice was surprisingly calm, carrying clearly in the vast, sudden silence. She stepped fully into the light, clutching her sling. Everyone, Luca's men, the remaining thugs, fell silent, watching the battered, injured young woman address her abuser. Emily's green eyes burned with a hard, clear, adult light. "We're done," she stated flatly. "You have no power over me anymore. You're going to jail or worse and I will still be standing. You lost." Brett's face contorted in pure, impotent hate. He lunged a fraction toward her, spitting something vile. Luca struck him across the jaw with the heavy butt of his pistol. Not wildly, but enough to send Brett reeling back onto the concrete floor, dazed and whimpering. "Mind your tongue," Luca said softly. The deadly quiet of his tone sent a sharp shiver down even Emily's spine, though she knew his anger wasn't aimed at her. "Remember where you are and who you're talking to." Brett coughed, struggling to clear the ringing from his ears. He looked up at Luca with sullen, cornered animal fear. "Go on then," he snarled hoarsely, trying desperately to save face in front of his defeated cronies. "Do it. Shoot me, you gangster coward. You don't have the guts." Luca's finger tightened almost imperceptibly on the trigger. For one terrifying instant, Emily thought he truly would. The certainty, the chilling abyss in Luca's eyes, suggested a man who found the idea of snuffing Brett out extremely satisfying, a necessary conclusion. But then Luca glanced at Emily. She was watching him, not with horror exactly, but with a silent, profound plea. She had seen enough violence for one day. She didn't want blood on his hands, especially not on her behalf. Exhaling slowly, Luca lowered the gun, easing the tension in the warehouse. "No," he said almost to himself. "I think spending the rest of your life in a cell is far more fitting." Brett blinked, seeming genuinely shocked that he wasn't about to die right there. Two of Luca's men hauled him up, binding his wrists with brutal efficiency. Police sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, doubtless drawn by the warehouse gunfire reports. Luca issued curt instructions to his people. They would leave the thoroughly beaten gangsters for the authorities, along with overwhelming evidence of their crimes. He'd ensure an anonymous tip was called in to guarantee swift arrival. None of Luca's own crew intended to be present when the flashing lights showed up. Within minutes, the vast warehouse was cleared of Luca's shadow operatives. They moved out like professional phantoms, escorting Emily and Marie to the waiting SUVs. Brett and his cronies remained behind in the dusty darkness, bruised, bound, and delivered to justice on a silver platter. As the convoy sped away under the fading wail of the approaching sirens, Emily sat in the back seat between her mother and Luca, shaking violently from the adrenaline crash. It was over. It was finally, truly over. Brett was done. He'd faced the law, and even if the law somehow failed him, Emily knew Luca's ominous promise hung over him for life. Either way, he'd never bother her again. She let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for months. The constricting pressure in her chest eased for the first time since Brett's dark shadow had first fallen over her life. Beside her, Marie squeezed her hand tightly, and on her other side, Luca gently draped a thick, cashmere blanket over both their shoulders, pulling it snug against the chilled air. "It's over," he affirmed, as if reading the final thought of immense relief flooding her mind. His dark eyes met Emily's, exhaustion and gratitude mingling deep within them. "He can't hurt you anymore." Emily's throat tightened with a surge of complex emotion, relief, overwhelming gratitude, and something deeper she dared not name just yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking on the final syllable. She looked from her mother to Luca. "Thank you both for being with me through this." Marie kissed her temple tenderly. "Sweetheart, we wouldn't be anywhere else." Luca said nothing, but he reached over and entwined his fingers with Emily's, careful to avoid jostling her cast. In that simple, powerful gesture, she felt everything he couldn't put into words. "I'm here. You're safe. Care about you." She leaned her heavy head on his shoulder as the distant city lights streamed by. Bruised, battered, and bone-weary, Emily Porter had never felt so wholly loved and protected. That night, back in the quiet, secure sanctuary of Luca's penthouse, Emily couldn't sleep. The draining adrenaline had long since given way to dull aches and raw, flashing memories of the day's trauma. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the spacious living room, gazing out at the breathtaking, indifferent city skyline. Her right arm rested heavy in its sling. Each throbbing pulse was a physical reminder that she was alive and that Brett hadn't won. "How are you feeling?" came Luca's voice, quiet and concerned, from behind her. She turned slowly. He was watching her intently from the sofa, all pretense of aloofness gone. Genuine worry etched across his handsome features. They had finished cleaning up the immediate chaos. Marie was safe and sound, having drifted back to sleep in the quiet confines of the guest room. Luca himself had shed the rain-soaked, blood-splattered clothes, now appearing dangerously appealing in a crisp navy dress shirt with the sleeves meticulously rolled up past his elbows. The residual tension of the night was visible only in the faint, deep purple bruise marking his jaw, a souvenir from the scuffle. Emily's chest tightened with a sudden, overwhelming surge of gratitude and guilt. She hadn't even managed a proper thank you for all the violence and horror he had endured on her behalf. Instead of answering his simple question about her state, she moved across the spacious room, her steps tentative, and sat down beside him on the edge of the velvet cushion. She reached out carefully and touched the discoloration on his jaw, her fingers tracing the tender spot. "Does this hurt?" she asked softly, her voice catching. Luca's dark eyebrows arched slightly in surprise at the unexpected physical contact. "It's nothing," he assured her immediately, though he tilted his head obligingly toward her gentle prodding. He held her gaze, offering a reassuring, almost dismissive smile. "I've had worse, trust me." Emily's eyes stung, threatening tears. This man had literally stood between her and death, taking punches, risking gunfire. She recalled one of his men had been wounded. Thankfully not gravely, she mentally corrected. And here Luca was, dismissing it all with a shrug, acting as if dodging bullets was part of his daily routine. Maybe for him it is, she thought, a sense of dizzying awe washing over her. "I remember you once said you have influence," she said quietly, her eyes focusing on the smooth silk of his shirt collar. "I'm starting to think that was a colossal understatement." A wry, almost boyish smile curved his lips. "Perhaps a bit," he admitted, the light catching the intensity in his eyes. An intimate silence settled between them, heavy with unspoken realization. Outside, the storm had finally expended its fury, leaving the night sky vast and dramatically clear. In the soft, amber glow cast by the nearby table lamp, Emily truly looked at Luca, this enigmatic, profoundly fearless man who had come roaring into her quiet life. She flashed back to the first time she had served him coffee months ago at the diner, remembering how intensely intimidating and aloof he had seemed. Who could have ever imagined that this powerful figure would become her guardian angel precisely when she needed one most? He cleared his throat, a small, deliberate sound that broke the charged silence. "So what's next for you, Miss Porter? Once your arm heals," he asked, attempting a tone of lightness, though he couldn't quite conceal the genuine, focused interest vibrating in his voice. Emily offered a faint, tired half-smile. "Honestly, probably back to waitressing, helping Charlie rebuild the diner, trying to wrestle life back into something resembling normal." Luca nodded thoughtfully, his thumb stroking the back of her hand where it rested near the bruise. "You could do that, certainly, but he added, his voice dropping an octave, becoming gentler. "There might be other options available to you now." She tilted her head, curiosity overriding her exhaustion. "What do you mean?" He offered a tentative, almost shy smile, a rare glimpse of uncertainty on his face. "Remember when I first came to the diner with my associate, and he spilled that searing hot coffee? You jumped into action so fast, you had him dunking his hand in ice water before he even registered the actual burn. You were incredibly impressive that day." Emily felt a faint blush creep up her neck. "It was just basic first aid, Luca, and I felt terrible he got hurt on my shift." "You have a gift for helping people," Luca continued, leaning closer, his gaze steady and serious. "Even tonight, with one arm useless in a sling and bullets flying, you were focused entirely on saving Marie's life. Not everyone possesses that kind of instinct or courage." He paused, then drew a deep breath, as if solidifying a decision that had been brewing for weeks. "You once mentioned you dreamed of becoming an EMT, pursuing your certification." She blinked rapidly, genuinely surprised he remembered such a minor detail she had tossed out months ago. "I did mention that. How on earth do you recall that?" "I remember everything you tell me," he said simply, the statement sounding less like a boast and more like an absolute truth. "And I've been thinking, If you still want to pursue that path, you absolutely should. The city needs compassionate, decisive people like you. He met her eyes earnestly, his intention crystal clear. If money or finding time off work is the only obstacle, I'd like to help you overcome it. I could arrange flexible hours for you somewhere, or simply cover the course fees outright. Whatever it takes for you to succeed. Emily's mouth fell open, speechless. Of all the things she expected him to say, a job offer, security arrangements, offering to sponsor her entire education and future was the most staggering possibility. Clear's throat. Luca, I can't accept that, she stammered, shaking her head faintly. You've already done so much for me tonight, more than I can ever repay. His hand found hers on the sofa, his grip firm and warm, anchoring her. Emily, listen to me. This isn't charity. Please, consider it an investment in someone I profoundly believe in. A playful, dangerous glint entered his eyes. Besides, one day I might get myself into serious trouble again and require a top-notch paramedic on speed dial. Selfishly, I'd like that paramedic to be you. Despite the heavy atmosphere, Emily couldn't help but laugh. A bright, genuine sound that had Luca's smile widening in response. A true light in the darkness. All right, she relented softly, feeling her heart lift. I'll think about it. It would be utterly amazing, honestly. A lifelong dream. He lifted her hand gently and pressed the back of it to his lips in a courtly, old-world gesture that sent a rush of nervous excitement fluttering through her chest. You deserve to live your dream, he said, his voice deep with conviction. A lump of emotion clogged her throat. No one outside of her late mother had ever shown such intense, unwavering faith in her potential. It was overwhelming in the best possible way. Luca seemed to sense her teetering on the edge of tears, and with his characteristic smoothness, he shifted topics, or rather, he finally addressed the single massive topic that had been silently looming between them since the attack. Emily, he began quietly, all playfulness gone. About everything you saw tonight. I need to tell you something foundational. She held her breath, instantly alert. He rarely sounded this unsure, this vulnerable. He continued, his gaze dropping to their intertwined hands, tracing the line where her flesh met his. My life is complicated. You probably realize by now I'm not exactly what society defines as a simple businessman. I have enemies, men like the ones who attacked us tonight. And I deal with problems in unconventional ways, often outside the law. His voice grew slightly hoarser, a confession in the darkness. I was afraid that seeing that side of my life, the true reality of it, would make you want to run the other direction as fast as possible. Emily swallowed hard, steadying herself. If you're trying to tell me you're some kind of crime boss or something, she said gently, the words coming out calmly despite the storm inside. I pieced a bit of it together already. At his slight look of genuine surprise, she managed a tiny, knowing grin. I'm not blind, Luca. The way people defer to you, the sheer resources you command, the family reputation you subtly mentioned before. I'd have to be stupid not to connect those obvious dots. A tense, electric silence settled between them again. Then Luca let out a long, ragged breath that was half relief, half resignation. And now that you know that reality, do I terrify you? She lifted his hand, cupping it protectively between both of hers. One warm and soft, the other encased in heavy plaster. You saved me, she emphasized, her gaze unwavering. Whatever line of work you're in, whatever label they put on you, with me, you've been nothing but kind and protective and profoundly honest in every way that matters. I'm not afraid of you, Luca. Noting the unsteady, quick rise and fall of his chest, she added in a near whisper, the honesty shocking even herself. In fact, I think I've never felt safer in my entire life than I do when I'm right here with you. His eyes snapped up to meet hers, instantly searching. In their depths, she saw hope fighting a desperate battle with disbelief. He raised a trembling hand toward her face, hesitating just an inch away. May I? He asked softly, a plea. Heart fluttering uncontrollably, Emily nodded her assent. His warm palm cradled her cheek, the rough calluses of his work brushing gently against her sensitive skin. The immediate heat sent a shower of tingles through her. You have absolutely no idea how much I needed to hear that, he murmured, closing his eyes briefly as if absorbing the weight of her declaration. Then Luca Romano, the stoic, supremely composed figure, the Mafia don feared by so many across the city, actually blushed. A faint, dark flush spread across his cheeks and up toward his temples. I've been alone a long time, Emily. I genuinely didn't realize how empty my life truly was until you stumbled into my existence. You've changed everything I knew about myself. He gave a shaky, disbelieving little laugh. Saving you, protecting you, has given me more purpose, more meaning, than all the decades of family business ever could. Tears slipped free from Emily's eyes, rolling down her cheeks and wetting his fingers resting against her skin. Luca, she whispered. He leaned forward instantly, gently resting his forehead against hers. The sudden, intense closeness stole her breath entirely. I care for you, Bissima. More than I can possibly say, he whispered, his voice low, raw, and intense with emotion. I know it's fast and probably crazy after everything, but I can't pretend anymore. You mean the world to me. A soft, surprising sob of pure happiness escaped her. She placed her palm over the rapid beating of his heart, feeling it thudding just as hard and frantically as her own. You mean the world to me, too, she confessed in a rush, a dam breaking inside her soul. I never thought I'd find someone who makes me feel this safe and this seen. And, she broke off, laughing through her tears. You're not getting rid of me easily now, Luca. I care about you so much. A brilliant, breathtaking smile broke across his face, transforming his features entirely. Emily thought dizzily that she would gladly do anything, sacrifice anything, to keep that magnificent, unguarded smile on him forever. Luca's thumb gently wiped away her lingering tears. They were barely an inch apart, their breaths mingling in the close space. Emily, he murmured, her name sounding like a profound prayer on his lips. She answered him by closing the minuscule gap, pressing her mouth firmly to his. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, a delicate touch, as if both of them were afraid to press too hard or break the other after all the hurt and fear they had recently endured. Luca's hand slid slowly to the nape of her neck, his fingers carefully tangling in her hair, while her good, functional arm looped around his broad shoulders. When she deepened the kiss, ever so slightly, he responded with a low, guttural groan, taking care to keep his touch light and reverent, mindful of her injuries and her fragility. Heat bloomed deep in Emily's chest, spreading outward like the warmth of a sunrise. Every point of contact with him, his hand cradling her face, his other arm drawing her tenderly closer, their lips moving together in perfect, silent understanding, felt powerfully healing. She poured all her gratitude, her profound admiration, and her budding, fierce love into that kiss, and Luca returned it tenfold, with the hungry passion of a man who had starved for genuine connection. They finally parted only when a sudden, bright flash of distant lightning momentarily illuminated the window, sharply reminding them of the late hour and the reality outside. Both were breathing heavily, their foreheads still intimately touching. Luca chuckled softly, the sound raspy with desire. I guess we should officially go on an actual date sometime, huh? Before my Nona finds out I saved your life and virtue and starts demanding I marry you immediately. Emily snorted a laugh, swatting his shoulder lightly with her good hand. Let's take it one simple step at a time, Romeo. Whatever pace you want, he agreed instantly, his eyes shining with pure contentment. He looked, she thought, like a man who had finally found stable, solid ground after years of aimless drifting. On the coffee table nearby, Emily's battered old flip phone rested, its screen still bearing the spiderweb of cracks. The very phone she'd answered in her darkest hour. She remembered that desperate, trembling night, her voice choked with pain. Asterisk, he broke my arm. Asterisk, it felt like a lifetime ago. Her broken arm would heal perfectly. In its place, something new and infinitely stronger had formed. A profound, deep bond forged in danger and mutual trust that nothing in the world could easily break. 2 weeks later, Margie's Diner proudly reopened its doors for business. Morning sunshine poured generously through brand-new picture windows onto freshly painted, cheerful yellow walls. Emily stepped inside, cradling her healing arm, now stabilized in a lightweight brace instead of the cumbersome plaster cast. She was immediately engulfed in a joyful, bear-like hug from Charlie. "Look who's back," the manager boomed happily, spinning her slightly. The few early bird customers, many of them regulars who vividly remembered the fire and the recent violence, broke into a warm, genuine round of applause. Emily flushed a deep pink, smiling ear to ear. The diner that had once been the scene of profound fear and destruction was now utterly filled with warmth, community, and celebration. News had spread quietly that the culprits behind the attack were apprehended and locked up, awaiting trial. The neighborhood had rallied powerfully to help rebuild, and an anonymous, massive donation. She knew exactly who had delivered it, had covered everything the inadequate insurance policy couldn't. Couldn't have done it without our guardian angel investor. Whoever they are, Charlie winked knowingly, tapping a newspaper article that mentioned the generous contribution to the diner's swift restoration. Emily laughed, feeling an enormous swell of pride, and glanced toward the corner booth. There sat Luca, impeccably dressed as always in a custom charcoal suit, sipping a black coffee while calmly reading the financial section of the paper. He caught her eye over the top of the broadsheet and gave her a subtle, warm nod of acknowledgement. He had insisted on coming to support her first day back, though he was careful to keep a respectful distance, staying in the background to avoid any unwanted attention. After exchanging a few tearful, joyful hugs with her returning coworkers, Emily slid into Luca's booth for a quiet moment. "How does it feel being back?" he asked, his eyes warm with deep, sincere pride. "Better than ever," she said, and truly meant it. The diner smelled intoxicatingly of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and glorious new beginnings. Under the table, she gave his hand a grateful, secret squeeze. "Thank you for making all this possible. They told me how someone covered the repair costs and the new equipment. I wonder who that could have been," she teased softly, her eyes twinkling. Luca shrugged lightly, feigning extreme innocence as he met her gaze. "I merely made a phone call or two. Nothing complicated." His thumb brushed gently over the back of her hand, a familiar, possessive gesture. "I just kept my promise, Emily, taking care of what's important to you." Before Emily could respond with proper adoration, old Jim, perched permanently at the counter, cupped a hand around his mouth and called out impatiently, "Emily, are we going to get some of your famous coffee around here? Or are you on permanent vacation now that the place is fixed up?" Laughter rippled good-naturedly through the small diner. Emily snorted. "Keep your shirt on, Jim." "Fresh pot coming right up," she called back playfully, standing up. Luca stood too, smoothly laying a generous, folded $100 bill on the table as a tip, far more than the coffee cost. "I'll get out of your hair now," he murmured, ever conscious of not wanting to cause a stir or draw attention to her new relationship. He wasn't one for big, emotional goodbyes, especially in public. Impulsively, Emily reached up on her tiptoes and pecked a quick, firm kiss on his cheek. "See you at home later," she whispered just for him, her breath warm against his ear. Luca's eyes lit up spectacularly at the word home, a word that now belonged exclusively to them. "Count on it," he replied softly, a genuine, powerful grin tugging at his lips. A couple of patrons nearby hooped and hollered good-naturedly at the small, affectionate display. Charlie, who had witnessed the kiss, nearly dropped a steaming coffee mug, astonished to see his mild-mannered, hard-working waitress kissing the enigmatic, intensely wealthy Mr. Romano. Emily just laughed, her cheeks bright pink but her heart soaring with happiness. She watched as Luca slipped gracefully out the door, nodding politely to an open-mouthed Charlie as he passed. Her heart swelled with love and an almost overwhelming gratitude. How strange and how utterly wonderful that the intimidating, silent man who used to sip his coffee in the corner booth had somehow become the unexpected love of her life. "All right, back to work," Charlie hooted, giving Emily a mock, stern look. "We've got customers waiting, superstar." Emily tied on her crisp apron and swung immediately into action, greeting customers with genuine joy as she moved easily behind the familiar counter. Her arm twinged a little. Healing was a process after all, and she knew she had a crucial EMT class to get to that evening. But life was good, better than good, infused with purpose and love. Her gaze fell on the old flip phone she kept right by the cash register. Its screen was still cracked, a small, ugly talisman of how far she had come. Once, she had answered a terrifying call on that phone in terror and pain. Now, it sat quietly amid the diner's cheerful bustle, a constant, vital reminder that sometimes the darkest, most frightening moments lead directly to the brightest, most incredible futures. A reminder that one desperate phone call had, against all odds, changed her life forever.